It's often said that the left aren't very patriotic, that they don't love the country. I always found that a little strange. After all, socialism is premised on the public good, focusing on the collective interests of society. So while Jeremy Corbyn might not call himself patriotic, he might not be hanging flags from lampposts, the policies he advances, like bringing rail operators into public ownership rather than letting be owned by overseas operators for profit, is essentially the same thing. It's putting the interests of this country and the people that live here first. Additionally, there's often been a bizarre line of attack, particularly from some on the right, namely that if you have a critique of the United States and disagree with Britain following Washington every single time, then you must hate this country. No, actually, I love it. That's why we should never repeat the idiocy of the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq ever again. The media paints opposition to Britain's subordination to Washington as ideological, left-coded, and unrealistic. And yet, a startling new poll reveals the extraordinary lengths much of this country is willing to go to if Trump tries to annex Greenland. Asked how they think Europe should react in the event of the USA seizing the territory, just 5% of respondents said we should accept it, just roll over. So what might look like a majority opinion on X is actually around 1 in 20 people. A reminder, Twitter isn't real. Even among Reform voters, the most pro-Trump voters in Britain, that figure is just 18%, less than 1 in 5. 14%, almost 3 times more people, think Europe should retaliate militarily. We should go to war with Washington over Greenland. And meanwhile, 30% favour economic sanctions and tariffs. That is, of course, very aggressive, but there are no guns and bombs involved. The leading option, however, favoured by 33% of the electorate, is diplomatic. Ideally, of course, that's what happens. And ideally, it works. The point is, though, that with Trump, such tools are rarely effective. A reminder from that extraordinary data, 44% of Brits, almost half of the country, favour either sanctions or military intervention if Donald Trump comes good on his promise to acquire Greenland. Did I ever think I'd be saying that sentence 5 years ago? Absolutely not. I would have thought aliens landing was more probable, frankly. Presumably for much of the right, these people, that 44% of the public, aren't patriots for taking their medicine and rolling over and shutting up. Because, of course, if you really love this country, you do everything you're told by the Americans. But while only 1 in 20 Brits say Europe should just let Trump have Greenland, Richard Littlejohn, star columnist at the Mail, has gone one further. He'd like Donald Trump to buy Britain. Trump should raise his sights from Greenland and buy Britain instead. I'd take him, warts and all, over our hopeless, complete and utter lawyer of a PM any day. Littlejohn is a man so famously patriotic. He, of course, pens his columns from, you guessed it, America. He has his finger on the pulse, all the way from Florida. Over the last 40 years, nobody has done more to contribute to British stagnation than the boomer slot merchants, just like Littlejohn, who write columns for this country's right-wing press. There's a lot of blame to go around, but in my book, they're number one. Meanwhile, on the other side of the political divide, Zach Polanski says American soldiers should be given the boot from Blighty. The Green Party leader told the Guardian newspaper that American troops should leave the country and that Britain's military needed a proper strategic review. But beyond even that, Polanski thinks Britain should leave NATO and give up its nukes. The Guardian writes this. The Green Party leader said he supported the UK leaving NATO, even though that is not official Green Party policy. Donald Trump has so much domination within NATO that I don't believe it's possible to reform NATO from within, he said. He said he wanted to see the UK give up its nuclear weapons, saying he would try to persuade other nuclear-armed countries, including Russia, to do the same. If we're not willing to have conversations about peace and diplomacy, that part of those conversations look at everyone denuclearising, then what are we doing here, he said. So, to be clear, I don't agree with that. I agree with booting American soldiers out of the UK. Can't happen all at once, might take time, but I think it's definitely a long-term objective that is worthy of pursuit, particularly if American politicians and governments persuade, particularly if American politicians and leaderships continue down this path that Donald Trump has begun. I agree with that. What I don't agree with is on the nuclear weapons side. We should absolutely move away from Trident. We should end Britain's dependence on Trident. We do not have an independent nuclear deterrent in this country. It's a lie. It's a fugazi. It's make-believe. We haven't had one since Polaris. We lease the missiles from the Americans. We pay hundreds of billions of dollars for something we can't use fundamentally without the Americans. I don't care what anybody says. Oh, it's strategically independent. If we want to, we can fire them. Okay, fire one, and the Americans don't like it. You can't fire anymore. And by the way, I think you're absolutely delusional if you don't think they've all got a kill switch. You'd have to be incredibly naive to think that, in my view. To think these missiles don't have a kill switch. Of course they do. By the way, not only do I think they have a kill switch, I'm pretty sure we know they have a kill switch. But of course, that's not the sort of thing that our security apparatus would tell the public, which is paying the £100 billion plus for Trident. At which point, then you have a conversation about where do you go. I think we should have far fewer nuclear weapons. I think the world needs far fewer nuclear weapons. But renouncing them altogether, while Russia, China, America, France still have them, I think is unwise. Instead, you would want a multilateral, coordinated settlement to wind down numbers gradually. So countries still have that capability, but they don't vaporize enemy states if, heaven forbid, those weapons are ever deployed. I think that's more realistic, and I still think it makes for a much better world. Kieran, I didn't mention NATO. What's your view on NATO and Britain's nukes?
My view on NATO and Britain's nukes is, well, first of all, there's nothing to disagree with at all, Aaron, in what you said about Trident and the utter redundancy of it, ultimately, because of the kill switch that we suspect exists and which has in various forms been confirmed as existing. I think it's a tremendous waste of money. I think it's a carbuncle from a previous era. And I think it's extremely inefficient as a form of national security, not just financially, but in its the ability to deploy it, right? The extent to which it keeps us safe for the reasons that you've talked about just now. My view of NATO is that NATO has created more danger in Europe than it has prevented. I think particularly NATO's kind of liberal, expansionist zeal in the kind of high liberal era of the 1990s and its eastward expansion to Russia, towards Russia. And I know we've ranged over this before, and I know it's controversial still with some people. I don't think it should be. I think it's pretty obvious that that NATO moving closer and closer to Russia's borders certainly spurred on rearmament in Russia, not nukes, of course, but rearmament in Russia, militarization, and the militarization of the buffer zones around its borders. Not making excuses for Russia. It's got its own internal dynamics, which spur, political games and incentives, which spur militarization as well. Political incentives that prop up failing careers and all the rest of it. That was certainly an input into the kind of jingoism that we see emanating from Russia over the past 10, 15 years. So my view of NATO, I mean, I'm not going to go into loads and loads of detail because we haven't got time for it, but my view is a pretty dim one.
I have to be clear about my views on NATO as well. I don't think we should be in NATO, but that's not because I do have an ideological aversion to NATO. NATO's dead, right? You can think it's good, you can think it's bad. Donald Trump killed it. It doesn't exist anymore. So if the Europeans are serious about collective security, then they should manage it themselves. And by the way, that's a really interesting conversation. The left is going to have to confront some really challenging orthodoxies it's held over the last 80 years. A lot of the peace movement, fundamentally, in my view, was premised on American global hegemony. It's really easy to be, peace and love if you've got this superpower across the Atlantic looking after you and having you under their umbrella. I believe in peace, but I'm not a pacifist. And also, by the way, just on nukes, so I think we should leave NATO, but that's because it's a dead letter, fundamentally. It's a dead letter when Trump is saying he wants Greenland, for God's sake. Also on nukes, do you really want Britain to give up nukes while the US and Israel has nuclear weapons? Do you really want to do that? Do you really want Benjamin Netanyahu to have a weapon that this country doesn't have? Let's say you have a left-wing government at some point. What do you think would happen if there's an imperialist right-wing US government? You've got Israel. What do you think would happen? You think that's a good thing? So I would have an independent capability. You don't need to have many warheads. Built here, not dependent on US technology. I'm sure that'll upset some people, actually. But I think it's very pragmatic, I'm sorry. I don't want the Israelis to have something this country doesn't have. I think it's genuinely plausible that Netanyahu nukes somewhere. You know, it wouldn't be a strategic weapon. It wouldn't be like a hydrogen bomb, but it might be a small tactical nuclear weapon. Heaven forbid. By the way, one of the miracles of the last 80 years is that we didn't use this technology after Hiroshima. Nobody used it. I did an interview with Serhiy Plokhy recently. He's got a great new book out on the development of nuclear technology and nuclear weapons. It's a miracle. It's a miracle. And by the way, it'll be a miracle, even bigger miracle, if we go another 80 years and nobody uses this stuff. So I care deeply about it, but I wouldn't want to get rid of them while the Israelis and the Americans have them. No, thank you. And the Russians, let's be honest. These are entities that really have very little interest in a democratic, socialist government in this country or anywhere else in Europe. No, thank you.